Hi, and thanks for watching this demonstration on how to build a vRealize Orchestrator workflow. By the end of this demonstration, you should be able to create a new folder and workflow, create and work with input parameters and attributes, use scripting and decision elements in a workflow, and write to the system log. The workflow will prompt the user for two numbers, use a little JavaScript to add the two numbers, determine if the sum is greater than 20, and print the results to the system log. The last items I want to discuss before we begin the demo are parameters and attributes. Input parameters are items that are inputted by the user running the workflow. Attributes are the read-write variables that we can use within the workflow. Output parameters simply provide data when the workflow is finished. The key here is that to use the input parameters in the workflow, we need to bind them to attributes. Let's go ahead and see how to do this. Here we are in vRealize Orchestrator, which I'll call VRO from now on. And just a note, I am running this and the associated vCenter as appliances from VMware Workstation 11. To begin, we'll navigate to the Workflows tab, right-click the top-level folder, and choose Add Folder. Let's name it My Workflows. We then right-click the folder and choose New Workflow. Let's call this workflow Is Sum Greater Than 20? I highly recommend descriptive names for workflows and workflow elements. It will make working with VRO much easier for you. We now see the Edit Workflow environment. Let's first define our input parameters. We'll click the Inputs tab and then the Add Parameter button. We'll rename the parameter to First Number. Set the type to number and give it a description. And now we'll create the second parameter in the same way. These two numbers are the only information we need from the outside sources. In our case, the user running the workflow. When we add the two numbers together, we'll need to store them somewhere. For this, we'll create an attribute. Attributes can be created in the bottom part of the General tab. We click the Add Attribute button and give it a name, a type, the default value, and a description. Excellent. Now we have everything we need to start building out the workflow itself. This is done in the Schema tab. On the left side, we see all the different elements we can add to our workflow. We'll start by dragging a scriptable task into the workflow. In this element, we'll add the two numbers together. After we add the two numbers, we'll need to decide whether the sum is greater than 20, and so we'll add a decision element. The green arrow will be followed if the decision element returns true, and therefore we'll create a scriptable task for that. And the dotted red arrow is followed if the decision element returns false. Let's quickly make the schema a little easier to see. Okay, now we'll go through and configure each of these elements. The first scriptable task will add the two user inputted numbers together. As we briefly discussed in the intro, we need to bind the input parameters to attributes in order to use them. This is easily accomplished in the Visual Binding tab. We simply drag the input parameters to the middle section. In order to make the sum attribute available to this element, we also drag it to the middle section. Lastly, we also need whatever changes we make to the sum element to be available to future elements, and so we need to connect the out attribute section as well. Now we'll write a little bit of JavaScript to add the numbers together. As we write our JavaScript code, we can simply click on the attributes to input them into the code. This is a good way to avoid typos in attribute names. The system.log call is used to write output to the system log. This is useful in determining what is happening in your code as well as for troubleshooting. Now let's configure the decision element. We simply choose the attribute and the comparison information. In our simple workflow, we'll simply write the result of the decision element to the system log for the comparison is true branch, and also for the comparison is false branch. And that's all there is. Now let's run the workflow and see how it goes. Since we have two input parameters, the workflow prompts us to enter the two numbers. We see that the workflow followed the decision is false branch and that the corresponding text has been written to the system log. Now let's run it again with different numbers. This time we'll make the sum greater than 20 and see what happens. As expected, the workflow followed the true branch, and the corresponding text has been written to the system log. This has been a demonstration on building a simple vRealize Orchestrator workflow. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration and that you'll take the time to build a similar workflow in your environment to practice building vRealize Orchestrator workflows. Thank you for watching.